A hush fell over the studio as Barron Trump, now in his early 20s and strikingly poised, stepped onto the set under the bright, unforgiving glare of countless spotlights. Cameras panned across the stage, capturing the eager face of the host, an outspoken media personality whose reputation for incendiary, gotcha interviews had skyrocketed her to prime time. Barron Trump settled into the guest chair with a quiet self-assurance that belied the swirling rumors about him. He was tall, much taller than many realized, and he carried himself with a calm grace, dressed in a fitted navy suit and a pale blue tie. The host, a woman in her mid-40s with impeccably styled hair and a trademark grin, cleared her throat the moment the producer cued the on-air signal. "So Barron," she began, leaning in just enough to exude intimacy, "you've chosen a rather unconventional path for someone in your position. You're not running a real estate empire or dabbling in politics, at least not yet. And you've mostly avoided the spotlight until now. Viewers want to know, why agree to come on my show when you've stayed so silent before?" Barron's eyes flickered with a hint of amusement, though his face remained largely serene. "Because you asked," he said simply, voice smooth but with a certain controlled warmth. "Sometimes silence gets mistaken for indifference or fear. I wanted to clarify a few things." The host's lips curved into a suggestive half-smile, as though she sensed blood in the water. "Well, I'm sure we have a lot of ground to cover," she said, crossing her legs. "Your father was, of course, a famously polarizing figure, and your mother maintained a far more discreet public presence. People often wonder how that shaped you." Barron inclined his head, his expression thoughtful. "I think every family shapes its children in unique ways, whether that family is in the public eye or not. My parents did the best they could under extraordinary circumstances, and I'm grateful for that." The host pounced on the opening. "Extraordinary circumstances? That's an understatement, isn't it? The media scrutiny, the controversies. It must have been intense, even stifling for a teenager. People say your upbringing was cloistered, like living in a golden cage. Care to comment?" Barron's lips twitched almost imperceptibly as though he were recalling a private joke. "Golden cage?" he repeated, letting the phrase hang in the air. "If that's a reference to wealth, yes, my family had resources, but that doesn't negate real challenges. Money doesn't automatically buy privacy or emotional security. Often it draws more attention. The difference is how one chooses to handle that attention. My mother taught me a long time ago that dignity has nothing to do with how many cameras are pointed at you, but how you carry yourself regardless." The host nodded, feigning agreement, though her eyes glinted with the anticipation of unveiling something juicy. "And yet," she pressed on, "some critics say your family's version of dignity came with double standards. You know, preaching certain values in public but behaving differently behind closed doors. Do you feel there was hypocrisy in your home?" A flicker of irritation crossed Barron's face, quickly replaced by composure. "Hypocrisy is a strong word. I'd say everyone learns and evolves, sometimes making mistakes along the way. My father faced controversies, no denying that, and people are free to judge him. But let's be real. Few families could survive the microscopic level of scrutiny we did without showing some cracks. The real question is whether you learn from your mistakes." The host perked up, detecting a subtle shift. "Speaking of mistakes," she said, leaning forward almost conspiratorially, "there have been rumors about your own escapades. Parties in Monaco, a rumored fling with a European heiress, hush-hush business deals that never came to fruition. Some say you're just another Trump living off a brand name without truly earning your place. Care to set the record straight?" Barron paused for a moment, a faint line forming between his brows. He clasped his hands together, scanning the host's face as though gauging her intent. The tension in the studio escalated. The audience leaned in, hungry for the next revelation. "One rumor at a time," he said softly. "I did attend some high-profile events in Monaco, yes. I was invited by friends who happen to move in certain social circles. If that offends people, well, I can't really control how they feel. As for a fling with an heiress, if you're referring to Beatrice Levine, she and I studied together abroad. We spent time in a group of classmates, nothing more. And hush-hush business deals? That's a creative way to describe a few networking opportunities that never took off. It's hardly scandalous to explore possibilities in the financial world, especially when your family name opens doors. The question is how you handle those doors, not whether they exist." The host's eyebrows rose in calculated surprise. "So you admit your family name opens doors for you? You don't think that's unfair to the average American struggling to pay bills?" Barron sighed, clearly recognizing the attempt to spin his words into a divisive soundbite. "Privilege isn't fair. I acknowledge that, and I'm grateful for the opportunities I've had. But let's not pretend that wealth and family connections automatically equate to success or happiness. Some people squander opportunities, others build on them. I'm trying to do the latter. That's hardly newsworthy, though, is it? She pressed further, her voice adopting a sharper edge. Some might say you're downplaying the effect of that privilege. You've got the best schools, the best tutors, money to fall back on, and a family that, despite controversies, still commands global attention. How do you relate to regular Americans who have none of that? Barron's expression hardened, though his tone remained measured. I relate as a human being who wants to do better, be better, and make a difference, even if I haven't walked in everyone's shoes. No one can fully understand another person's struggle, but that doesn't mean we shouldn't try. I've been quietly involved in charitable work focusing on mental health in teens, something I care about because I've lived with the constant glare of judgment. Granted, my challenges are different from someone who's worried about putting food on the table, but empathy can extend across different life experiences. The host's eyes flashed. Oh, so you're a humanitarian now? That's interesting because we rarely hear of your involvement in philanthropic causes. Is this a recent development to polish your image? Barron let out a slow breath. I've been involved for years, but I don't see the point of broadcasting every donation or volunteer hour on social media. That might sound counterintuitive in the age of Instagram activism, but I believe in doing good without turning it into a PR spectacle. That's not about image, that's about conviction. If it helps even one kid struggling in the shadows, I'm satisfied. Whether or not the media picks it up is irrelevant. She didn't let up, though. You say it's not about PR, yet here you are sitting on my show, which is known for, let's face it, incisive questions that sometimes uncover unsettling truths. So what's changed? A small smile curved on Barron's lips. I came here because I knew you'd ask hard questions, and I believe it's time people see a fuller picture of who I am. I've been portrayed as everything from a mysterious recluse to a spoiled brat, none of which captures who I am or what I stand for. The host shifted in her chair, obviously unsatisfied. She pivoted abruptly. Speaking of what you stand for, the Trump name is synonymous with a specific political ideology, tough stances on immigration, big business, combative media relations. Where do you fall on these issues? Barron tilted his head, considering his response. I have my own views, and they evolve as I meet new people and learn more. I'm not my father, I'm not my mother. I'm me. I think the immigration system is broken and needs compassionate reform. I think business can be a force for good if handled ethically. And I think the media plays a critical role in democracy, provided it aims for truth, not just clicks and sensationalism. Her lips tightened as though she wanted to press but sensed he was too polished to slip. So she chose a new angle, a spicier one. Let's discuss something you never talk about, your personal life. Photos popped up recently of you partying with questionable crowds, models, older celebrities, rumored girlfriends. You're seen in nightclubs, expensive resorts, even rumored to have tried certain substances. Care to confirm or deny? He stared at her, a flicker of irritation finally surfacing. I'm human, and I have friends who like to have a good time. That doesn't mean I engage in every activity they do. Did I try a drink before I was 21? Probably in Europe, where the legal age is lower. Did I do anything that destroyed my life or endangered someone else's? Absolutely not. But if you're looking for a headline, Barron Trump does shots with models, then go ahead. It wouldn't be the first time the media exaggerated a party photo. The host seized the moment, sensing vulnerability. So you don't deny indulging? Some might say that's typical of a wealthy heir. No accountability, no consequences, just mommy and daddy's money to bail you out. Barron's jaw tensed. Typical? My mother isn't funneling me money, and my father has always insisted I make my own way. When I was younger, sure, I had family resources. But after I turned 18, I set out to create my own path. If you're trying to paint me as an entitled trust fund brat who never faced consequences, you're barking up the wrong tree. I've faced plenty of consequences, like endless public scrutiny for the smallest misstep. Maybe that's a different kind of accountability, but it's real, and it's relentless. The air in the studio crackled with tension. The audience watched as the host leaned back, crossing her arms. You talk about relentless scrutiny, but maybe the public has a right to know who you really are, given your family's influence on this country. Some suspect you might use that influence for your own gain one day, even run for office. Is that part of your plan? Barron let out a soft chuckle, devoid of humor. People are free to suspect whatever they want. I'm not running for office. I'm not even sure if I'd ever want that. My goals are more entrepreneurial, more philanthropic. Politics, I've seen too much of it from behind the scenes to jump in blindly. She latched onto that. Behind the scenes? Care to elaborate on what you saw? He hesitated, then spoke carefully. I saw how politics can corrupt good intentions, how it can be more about winning battles than serving people. It's made me cautious about the entire arena. If I ever did get involved, it would be on my own terms for specific issues, not to climb some power ladder. The host's calculated smile returned. Speaking of power, your father was known to have a strong personality. How did that dynamic shape you? Did you ever feel overshadowed or pressured to live up to something you didn't choose? Barron's posture straightened, eyes narrowing slightly. My father's personality is well documented. I learned a lot from him. How to stand firm, how to negotiate, and yes, how to handle intense criticism. But I also learned from my mother the value of measured words, dignity, and empathy. If anyone overshadowed me, it was me. I sometimes chose to stay silent, to watch rather than speak. The host's gaze flicked to her note cards as if searching for the final lethal question she believed would unmask him. You're quite poised, Barron, but we both know no one is perfect. If you had one major regret, one thing you wish you could go back and change, what would it be? His expression turned momentarily pensive. I regret the times I judged people too quickly, he said quietly, surprising her and the audience. Growing up in a bubble, you form assumptions. When I first met people from drastically different backgrounds, especially those less privileged, I assumed they couldn't relate to me. That was ignorant. Over time, I realized we share more common ground than I ever imagined. I wish I had learned that lesson sooner. She raised an eyebrow, clearly not expecting that answer. That's surprisingly introspective, she remarked. And what sparked that realization? He offered a half smile. A volunteer program I joined, working with homeless teens, hearing their stories, seeing how circumstances beyond their control shape their entire lives. It's humbling to realize that if you change a few details, family, wealth, geography, I could have been in their shoes. That changed my perspective profoundly. A momentary hush settled over the set as the host seemed at a loss for a direct attack on that admission. But she rallied, deciding to shift into even more personal territory. Since you mentioned empathy, let's talk about your relationship with women. Some critics say the Trump men have a certain reputation. How do you handle dating, relationships, and the possibility that people might be with you for your last name rather than who you really are? Barron's eyes flickered with what might have been mild exasperation. I won't deny it can be difficult to know someone's true motives, but that's a universal problem for anyone with a measure of fame or wealth. I've learned to look for authenticity. People who challenge me, stand up to me, and aren't just starstruck. Have I misread a few people along the way? Sure, but that's how you learn. Her smile turned razor thin. So no truth to the rumors that you've had a string of superficial relationships with models and socialites? He shook his head lightly. I've dated, yes, but I also spend a lot of time with friends who happen to model or come from well-known families. That doesn't automatically mean superficial. Don't judge a person solely by their profession or their social status. That's ironically the same kind of bias I'm often accused of having. The host's eyes flicked to her producer, who gave a subtle nod to let her know they still had time. She decided to up the ante. Let's pivot to something more controversial, perhaps. Your father's political rallies often featured strong rhetoric against certain communities. Do you disavow any of that? Where do you stand on, for instance, the LGBTQ+ community, or racial justice movements, or women's rights? The studio collectively inhaled, awaiting his response. Barron's expression grew serious, but he showed no sign of flinching. I believe in individual freedoms, equality, and empathy. If people are marginalized or facing systemic injustice, we should address that. I'm not afraid to say I disagree with certain stances my father took or the tone he used. But I also understand some of his supporters felt unheard by the political establishment. The solution isn't dividing the country further, it's listening to each other. I'm not going to label myself with any party, but I firmly support the rights of the LGBTQ+ community and the fight against racial discrimination. And as for women's rights, of course I support them. My mother is one of the strongest individuals I know. She taught me that gender should never limit anyone's potential. The host saw her opportunity for a gotcha moment. So are you saying you openly disagree with certain policies your father championed? Because that might shock his base, a base that might support you if you ever run for office. Barron let out a long breath through his nose, his voice dropping. I'm not beholden to a base. I'm my own person with my own perspectives. Yes, I disagreed with some of his policies. That's part of growing up, forming your own viewpoints. I'm sure I'll disappoint some of his hardcore fans, but I'd rather be honest than pander. Her eyes gleamed with triumph, as though she finally had him in a corner. So you're not afraid to lose that support? You're not worried about tarnishing the Trump name or going against the family legacy? Barron's reply was swift. A legacy that can't withstand honest conversation isn't worth much. My family's legacy is multifaceted. It's not just about politics or business or name recognition. For me, it's also about the values I learned from my mother: respect, composure, and empathy. If I lose some supporters by expressing my opinions, so be it. I'm not for sale. The audience murmured in surprise, some nodding in approval, others glancing around in stunned silence. Sensing the tide shifting, the host tried another tactic, a last-ditch effort to rattle him. You paint a picture of independence, empathy, and humility, but critics say you've never genuinely faced hardship. Everything's been handed to you on a silver platter. How do you respond to those who say, Barron Trump is just playing humble while still living off a gold mine? His jaw tightened, but he remained calm. I'll never claim I've had the same hardships as someone born into poverty or systemic disadvantage, but I've faced my own challenges: public scrutiny, expectations, personal struggles with anxiety in the spotlight. Maybe those don't earn sympathy, but they're real to me. My inheritance might be financial, but it also includes a media storm that never goes away and people eager to see you fail. She saw a crack and pushed. Anxiety? Are you admitting vulnerability? That's rare for a Trump. He shrugged, a hint of sadness flickering in his eyes. Is it so surprising that someone thrust into the global spotlight from childhood would feel anxious or overwhelmed? My mother shielded me as much as she could, but once I stepped out on my own, I realized the weight of the name I carry. That can be both a blessing and a curse. For a moment, the host seemed genuinely taken aback. The audience, too, appeared caught off guard by his candor. Barron's gaze swept across the studio, taking in the onlookers and the cameras. He seemed at once vulnerable and unyielding, aware that every word would be dissected yet refusing to hide. The host, trying to maintain her composure, decided to throw one final incendiary question, one she believed might topple the calm facade. Barron, there have also been unsubstantiated rumors about tensions between you and some members of your family, arguments, disagreements, even legal threats. Is there any truth to the rumor that you tried to distance yourself legally from the Trump name? A ripple of shock passed through the audience. This was the spicy bombshell gossip that tabloids had whispered about, though few took it seriously. Barron's expression darkened, and for a beat, it looked like he might let anger flare. But when he spoke, his words were slow, deliberate. I never threatened legal action to distance myself from my family name. Did we have disagreements? Sure, like any family. Sometimes those disagreements were heated, especially when it came to politics or how to handle the media. But legal threats? No. I love my parents, and no matter our differences, I respect them. Some rumors are just that, rumors. She didn't appear entirely convinced. So you're denying any legal moves to separate yourself from the Trump brand. You haven't, for example, trademarked your name in a way that specifically excludes your father's involvement. A muscle worked in Barron's jaw. I trademarked my name for personal branding reasons, to protect it from unauthorized use. That's standard practice for public figures. It wasn't a move against my father or anyone else in my family. You can spin it however you want, but that's the truth. The host's shoulders dropped slightly, as though she realized she was out of ammunition. The interview had gone on longer than expected, and instead of cornering him, she found herself repeatedly parried by a composed young man who refused to crumble. The audience, initially expecting a tabloid-style grilling, seemed transfixed by this version of Barron, one who was neither demure nor inflammatory but resolute in his own carefully formed identity. Sensing the momentum slipping from her grasp, the host forced a final cordial smile. Well, Barron, you've certainly given us plenty to think about. Before we wrap up, is there anything you'd like to say directly to our viewers? Anything you feel people misunderstand about you? Barron settled back into his chair, folding his hands in his lap. I'd say this. If you want to know who I am, don't just rely on headlines or rumors. I'm trying to navigate the world like everyone else, learning from mistakes, building on opportunities, and finding my place. I'm not perfect, and I don't claim to be, but I do claim my independence and my right to grow, to care about things that matter, and to be more than just a last name. The lights dimmed slightly, signaling the transition to commercial. The host glanced to her producer, who gave the wrap signal. She turned back to the camera, forcing her signature grin. This has been a revealing conversation with Barron Trump, a figure many of us thought we knew. We'll be right back after these messages. As soon as the cameras cut, the host's posture slumped, and she turned to Barron with a vaguely strained civility. "Well," she said in a clipped tone, "that was more contained than I anticipated. Congratulations on holding your own." He stood, offering a polite nod. "Thank you for the opportunity," he said, extending his hand. She hesitated only for a fraction of a second before shaking it. "I appreciate the conversation, even if we disagree." Producers and stagehands bustled around the set, unhooking microphones and ushering Barron toward the green room. A few onlookers in the audience stared at him with newfound curiosity, wondering if this calm, thoughtful young man was truly a product of the same tumultuous political stage that had gripped the nation. Some were disappointed not to have witnessed a meltdown or a sensationalist confession. Others seemed intrigued, perhaps even impressed by his composure. In the quiet of the green room, Barron removed his microphone pack and set it on the table. A junior producer hovered by the door, eyes wide with excitement. "That was intense," she said timidly. "I've never seen her fail to corner someone like that. She always has a final trick up her sleeve." Barron offered a small smile, exhaustion tinging his expression. "She tried," he murmured. "I just came in ready." The producer hesitated, fiddling with her clipboard. "Is it true what you said about volunteering with homeless teens?" He nodded. "Absolutely. It's something I care about, especially mental health support, therapy, safe housing. If you think my name can help draw attention to the issue, then I'm willing to do what it takes." The woman nodded, clearly impressed. "Well," she said softly, "it's good to see this side of you. People only know the tabloids or the rumors. This changes things." Barron gave her a polite nod and thanks. "I hope so," he replied, picking up a bottle of water. As he drank, 1,000 thoughts spun through his mind. He had always known a day like this would come, a high-stakes televised conversation that would test his resolve in a very public way. Part of him had dreaded it. Part of him welcomed the chance to finally shape his own narrative. He took a moment to breathe, leaning against the wall. Beyond the door, he could hear the muffled buzz of the production crew dismantling cameras and lights. No doubt the show's social media accounts were already uploading clips, moments they hoped would trend, perhaps a snippet where he seemed to confirm or deny something sensational. But Barron understood the game. He'd grown up around it, learned from it, resisted it. He also knew that real change, real progress in his life, wouldn't come from one TV interview, but from countless quiet actions that no camera would ever capture. He closed his eyes, recalling the host's accusations, the rumors she had hurled his way, partying, superficial relationships, entitlements, contradictions. Some had a kernel of truth, others were distortions, and a few were outright false. He'd answered as honestly as he could without stooping to sensationalism. The public would decide what they believed, as they always did. Moments later, he stepped into the hallway, where another wave of staff and interns politely stepped aside to let him pass. A security guard guided him out of the building and toward a waiting SUV. Reporters had gathered outside, cameras flashing, microphones thrust forward, all shouting questions. He paused briefly, scanning the throng of journalists eager to pry out a final statement. Their questions overlapped. "Barron, how do you feel about the interview?" "Barron, did you talk to your father before coming here?" "Barron, is it true you're working on a startup?" He lifted a hand in a gesture of calm. "One at a time," he said, voice firm but not unkind. "I'll say this. I meant everything I said in there. Watch the interview, and you'll see my answers." Then he offered a polite, almost apologetic smile. "But I'm done talking for today.